Brigadier Bernard Ferguson participated in several dangerous missions in the China-Burma-India theater. Bernard Edward Ferguson was born on May 6, 1911, and completed his education at Eton. After graduating from the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, he received his commission into the Black Watch Regiment. His regimental service brought him into contact with his superior officer in the Black Watch, Archibald Wavell, with whom Ferguson would later serve as aide-de-camp in Palestine during the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939. At the beginning of World War II, Ferguson held the position of brigade major in the 46th Infantry Brigade and then became a general staff officer in the Middle East under Wavell, who was then commander-in-chief of the Middle East. When Wavell was dismissed from that position in June 1941 after suffering defeat by German General Erwin Rommel, he was reassigned as commander-in-chief in India, switching roles with General Sir Claude Auchinleck. Ferguson followed Wavell to Delhi, joining his general headquarters staff. Ferguson later wrote about their long association, expressing his gratitude for the chance to work with Wavell from the age of 23 until Wavell's death, when Ferguson was 39. While working as a staff officer, Ferguson interacted with Brigadier Orde Wingate, a unique and eccentric figure. One observer described Ferguson as a monocled officer from the Black Watch with a distinguished air. Ferguson had a conventional military background, having been an instructor at Sandhurst, a student at the Staff College at Camberley, and a junior intelligence officer in Palestine, where he and Wingate first crossed paths. During the early years of the war, Ferguson worked as a liaison officer with Turkish forces under Wavell's Middle East Command, and also served with the Free French in the Syrian campaign against Vichy forces. In mid-1941, he served in Tobruk as a regimental officer. During the British retreat through Burma in the spring of 1942, Ferguson's regiment was dispatched from Syria to try and reach Rangoon before its fall. However, the speed of the British collapse in Burma meant they arrived too late, and they began retraining in Bombay. Given Ferguson's planning experience, he was transferred in May 1942 to the newly created Joint Planning Staff in Delhi to explore strategies for retaking Burma. At GHQ in India, he encountered many ideas about the recapture of Burma, but only one individual left a lasting impression, a broad-shouldered, intense officer who would drift in and out of the office, speaking in dreams and attracting attention, despite ignoring others. This was Wingate. Ferguson, like Wingate, had a strong interest in the Near East, and had also been involved in intelligence work in Palestine. They had met in the late 1930s, and again when Wingate led Gideon Force in Ethiopia. Ferguson was unhappy with his desk role in Delhi, and felt frustration not only on his own behalf, but also for Wavell, comparing the effective staffs under Wavell's earlier commands to the unsatisfying situation in Delhi. He was eager to return to field operations. When Wavell supported Wingate's plans to create a long-range penetration unit, Ferguson was eager to participate. He joined Wingate's 77th Indian Brigade in the autumn of 1942 to prepare for Operation Longcloth in early 1943. Wavell felt that Ferguson had finally found the mission that suited him best. At GHQ Delhi, few believed in Wingate's ideas except Wavell. The 77th Brigade was often referred to disparagingly as Wavell's private army. In his memoirs, Ferguson wrote that he was one of the few at JPS willing to listen to Wingate and thus was tasked with engaging with him whenever he appeared. After repeatedly requesting to return to his regiment, Ferguson was finally granted a transfer in September 1942 to the Black Watch, then performing internal security duties in Bihar. But Wingate reappeared and immediately invited Ferguson to command one of his columns. Upon arriving at Wingate's jungle training camp in Manipur, another officer warned him to leave, claiming Wingate was unstable. Despite the warning, Ferguson stayed. Operation Longcloth began on February 8, 1943. The brigade advanced southeast from Imphal to the Assam-Burma border. Once inside Burma, The brigade was split into two groups. The northern group included brigade headquarters, the Burma Rifles headquarters, HQ2 group, and columns 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Ferguson led column 5. The southern group included HQ1 group and columns 1 and 2. The northern group had about 2,200 men. The southern group about 1,000. Their mission was to disrupt the lines of communication of the Japanese 18th and 33rd Divisions, mainly by sabotaging the Burmese railway and testing long-range patrol tactics. On February 13th, the northern group crossed the Chindits River at Tonhe, completing the crossing by February 18th. Moving through rough terrain for 2 weeks, they reached areas near Pinlebu undetected. Columns 3 and 5, led by Mike Calvert and Ferguson respectively, aimed to damage the Burmese railway, which ran from Myitkyina to Mandalay, cutting it in multiple locations. Other columns sought to engage the Japanese to disguise the railway attack. By March 6th, Calvert's column had cut the railway in 70 places and destroyed 2 bridges, one spanning 300 feet. Ferguson's column destroyed a railway bridge about 10 miles northeast of Bonchong, dropping its 40-foot center span into the river. He also dynamited a gorge outside Bonchong to block the railway. Although the damage was initially successful in disrupting Japanese supply lines, the railway was repaired within 4 weeks using forced labor. Some critics argued that Wingate's decision to cross the Irrawaddy River next was the most dangerous of the campaign, resulting in heavy casualties and drawing significant blame. Calvert and Ferguson also supported the crossing. The key dilemma was whether crossing the Irrawaddy with depleted columns was more dangerous than retracing their path through jungle territory now filled with Japanese patrols. It must be stated that when Wavell reapproved Operation Longcloth, his orders specifically allowed for the 77th Brigade's crossing of the Irrawaddy as long as it remained feasible and aligned with the goal of evaluating the limits of long-range patrols. On March 10th, Column 5 under Ferguson crossed the Irrawaddy at Tigyang, but they were discovered by the Japanese. The inhabitants of Tigyang welcomed Ferguson's column and provided boats for the crossing. Wingate signaled Ferguson on March 23rd to meet him at a supply drop rendezvous near Bamo, where the 77th Brigade fought its last coordinated battle under harsh conditions and with only a partial airdrop. Column 5 had minimal food and water. In the area between the Shweli and Irrawaddy rivers, the men survived by extracting fluid from bamboo shoots and butchering mules and other animals for meat. On March 24th, Wingate received orders to recross the Irrawaddy and withdraw westward to the Chindits. With Japanese forces present on the west bank and only a few boats available, this was a daunting challenge. The remaining columns were eventually broken into smaller dispersal groups. Ferguson met Wingate on March 25th and proposed that the Chindit force remain intact, keeping its animals and heavier weapons. Wingate rejected this, arguing that the force was too large to be effectively supplied in the vulnerable Shweli Loop. Ferguson launched an attack on Hatikwa, midway between Bamo and Mogong, in one of Wingate's aggressive assaults, losing radio communications during the process. This separated Ferguson's column further from the main force and another Royal Air Force supply drop. After a difficult crossing of the Irrawaddy, Ferguson's depleted column marched for another 15 days and finally reached the Chindits on April 24th, arriving at Imphal 2 days later. Only 95 out of the original 318 men in Column 5 survived. Ferguson later reflected on Operation Longcloth, stating that although tangible accomplishments were limited and sometimes overstated in media coverage, the mission offered valuable experience. They had destroyed parts of a railway quickly repaired, gathered useful intelligence, killed some enemy soldiers, and proved that resupply by air was viable. This experience laid the groundwork for future operations. In the introduction to Ferguson's book, The Wild Green Earth, the now Brigadier of Special Forces in the 3rd Indian Division's 16th Brigade, described Wingate's original plan for Operation Thursday, which began in early March 1944. The aim was to insert his special force into the area of Indaw, a vital communication hub in Upper Burma. Part of the force would fly in, while Ferguson's brigade would march. The goal was to seize and hold an enclave into which 2 regular divisions could be flown, allowing the corps around Imphal to advance. This would cut off the Japanese opposing Stilwell in the north and provide British Indian divisions with a launch point to advance on a broad front. Ferguson later learned from General Sir William Slim, commander of the 14th Army, that the original plan had already been modified by the time Calvert's and Lentaine's brigades flew in and before his own brigade began its march. A Japanese advance across the Chindits in March 1944 had prompted changes. Wingate's brigade commanders were not informed of the plan's modification, perhaps to avoid discouraging them, or because Wingate hoped to force a return to the original plan through favorable outcomes. As early as January 16, 1944, Wingate had informed Mountbatten that a Japanese move to the Chindits was likely in preparation for an offensive against the Kohima plain in northeast India. He noted that the Japanese would rely on long, vulnerable roads and that their offensive would be powerful, possibly leading to the temporary loss of Manipur. This prediction was accurate. On March 14th to 15th, 3 Japanese divisions launched Operation U-Go from north of Hamelin and across the central Chindits front. Ferguson's detailed account of Wingate's original plan and his awareness of the impending Japanese offensive into Assam highlights the ongoing debate over Wingate's approach, whether it represented strategic brilliance or reckless madness. Ferguson clearly believed it was the former. To reach the Chindits River, Ferguson's 16th Brigade departed from Ledo, India, on February 5, 1944, climbing over the Patkai Hills via General Joseph Stilwell's Ledo Road. They crossed the Chindits unchallenged on February 28 northeast of Kamai, helped by a decoy crossing to the south. Boats and engines for the real crossing were landed by glider near the river, while the decoy team was flown in by light aircraft. The brigade's objective was the Indaw airfield complex, located 300 to 400 miles to the south. On March 10th, when the brigade neared Hakamti, Ferguson sent 2 columns to capture Longcloth from the south. On March 12th, he was ordered to capture the Indaw airfields, nearby communication and supply depots, and to establish an airfield base later named Aberdeen. Moving south alongside and west of the railway, the brigade progressed toward Indaw. Recognizing the threat to his supply lines, Japanese 15th Army Commander General Renya Mutaguchi dispatched 1 battalion each from the 18th, 56th, and 15th Divisions to form an anti-airborne brigade. General Kawabe Masakazu, commander of the Burma Area Army and Mutaguchi's superior, also sent the 24th Independent Mixed Brigade from southern Burma and elements of the 2nd Division. These were placed under Major General Yoshihide Hayashi, who took command at Indaw on March 18th. Unfortunately, Brigadier Walter Lentaine's 111th Brigade, delayed in its march from its landing field at Xingbuyang, failed to block Japanese reinforcements from the south before Ferguson could attack. By the end of March, nearly 20,000 Japanese troops were in the Indaw-Maulu area. While this concentration prevented an early British capture of the area, it also diverted troops from Japanese operations against Imphal and Kohima. The Chindits, with approximately a division's strength, thus engaged forces equivalent to 2 full Japanese divisions, while Slim's 14th Army faced only 3.5 divisions across the broader front. On March 19th, Ferguson established a base at Tonglal, later moved near Monton, where the Broadway airstrip was constructed starting March 20th. Unlike other strongholds, Aberdeen was never attacked by Japanese ground troops, only by air. After the long overland march, Ferguson's troops were scattered and requested time to regroup. Aware of mounting Japanese reinforcements, Wingate ordered Ferguson to attack with 3 battalions on March 24, the same night Wingate died in a fiery plane crash. The Japanese had anticipated the attack and had 10 battalions ready to defend Indaw. Ferguson requested reinforcements from Aberdeen, including elements of the Chindits' 14th Brigade, but Wingate, without informing Ferguson, had redirected those troops south to disrupt Japanese supply lines, leading to the Chindwin. There is much speculation about who ultimately conceived the plan for the 14th Brigade to attack the rear of the Japanese forces advancing on Imphal. One account suggests that when Brigadier Derek Tulloch informed Wingate that General Slim was seriously considering incorporating the 14th and 23rd Chindit Brigades into the 14th Army for the defense of Imphal and Kohima, Wingate flew immediately to meet Slim at Camilla. A compromise was reached in which the 14th Brigade would not be incorporated into the 14th Army, nor would it assist Ferguson at Indaw. Instead, elements of the brigade would be deployed approximately 60 miles southwest of Aberdeen to disrupt Japanese communication lines supporting the Yugo offensive from the rear. As a result, the defense of Imphal and Kohima came at the expense of weakening Ferguson's assault on Indaw. Despite this, Ferguson continued to apply sound military principles and ordered a raid on a Japanese supply dump near the Indaw West airfield after his 16th Brigade discovered it was a key ammunition depot for the Imphal-Kohima offensive. Reflecting on Operation Thursday in his memoirs, Ferguson admitted to making 3 mistakes at Indaw: failing to insist on rest for his troops before the assault, misjudging the Japanese reaction to his approach, and losing contact with his columns. Ferguson's plan was to attack Indaw from the north with 4 columns, while other columns would block reinforcements from the west and south. Ultimately, 1,800 weary Chindits, after marching 400 miles without rest, launched the assault. Several issues hampered the effort. 2 columns from another Chindit brigade, likely en route to Pinwi, crossed Ferguson's planned attack route, using a fictitious attack on Indaw as a cover for their real objective. This was another instance of excessive operational security undermining mission success by keeping subordinate commanders in the dark. Water scarcity on the eastern side of the Misa River also posed a challenge. Ferguson, having seen men die of thirst in Syria in 1941, was determined to secure water supplies and prioritized gaining control of Indaw Lake. The Japanese, aware of his northern approach, anticipated a battle for water. Coordination among Ferguson's columns faltered when one accidentally triggered a firefight north of Indaw, alerting the Japanese and disrupting the attack's timing. Compounding the problems, 72 hours of thunderstorms severed Ferguson's wireless communication with his columns as they approached Indaw Lake, which separated the Indaw West and East airfields. Out of his 6 engaged columns, 3 lost their offensive capacity, 2 were fully committed, and only 1 remained intact, positioned on the road between Indaw and Banmok. Ferguson briefly considered retreating to the Kachin Hills to preserve his force, and was informed that the 14th Brigade had been redirected to the Tong and Mogang valleys, far from Indaw. He then ordered the remaining columns to return to Aberdeen for rest and resupply, noting they had endured 7 weeks of hard marching, limited rations, and minimal water. Although disappointed by the failure to take Indaw, he later learned it was not unexpected by his colleagues or headquarters. Even Wingate had reportedly expressed doubts about the operation's chances. After refitting at Aberdeen for over a month, Ferguson's brigade successfully captured the Indaw West airfield on April 27th. He described this second effort as anticlimactic for 2 reasons. First, just before the operation, he learned that even if the airfield was captured, no reinforcements would be flown in, as all available forces were engaged in the battle for Manipur. Second, the Japanese had already abandoned the airfield, and the Queen's regiment secured it without resistance. Ferguson was later ordered to fly out of Burma from either Ain or Broadway, the latter being the original Chindit landing zone in early March. He returned to India by plane on May 3, 1944. Regarding the post-war debate over Wingate's legacy, Ferguson's position is clear. In Beyond the Chindwin, he wrote that while Wingate was idealized by some, especially journalists, and criticized by professional rivals, two things were certain. Wingate was a rare military genius, and no other officer could have envisioned, planned, trained, and led the Chindit force as he had. He excelled at planning, training, and leading, with strategic vision matching his tactical brilliance. Ferguson served as Director of Combined Operations from 1945 to 1946. After an unsuccessful run for Parliament, he returned to Palestine in 1946 as a brigadier to address the Jewish insurgency. During this time, he became involved in a controversial investigation concerning the death of a Jewish dissident, leading to his return to Britain. During the Suez Crisis in the mid-1950s, Ferguson was placed in charge of psychological warfare efforts to regain control of the canal following Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalization. In 1962, he was appointed Governor-General of New Zealand, a post he held for 5 years as the last British-born holder of the position. His father and grandfathers had also governed New Zealand. In 1972, he was made a life peer as Baron Ballantrae. He died on November 28, 1980, after serving for 7 years as Chancellor of the University of St. Andrews. Turning to a related matter, a letter from Steve Fogden responds to an inquiry regarding Captain Tage and John Clay Shane. Fogden acknowledges limited information about Captain Tage, a member of the 2nd Battalion of the Burma Rifles, during the 1944 Chindit expedition. He notes that Captain Tage later served with the Karen Army and achieved the rank of Aden in 1947. Attached is a photograph of Burma Rifles officers at Dehradun in 1944, which includes both Captain Tage and John F. L. Shane. There is a short biography of Shane online, noting he was awarded the Military Cross for his service in Burma. Fogden invites any further information or photographs related to these men and highlights the vital role played by the Burma Rifles in the Chindit expeditions. These troops provided invaluable local knowledge, guided British forces through jungle terrain, liaised with villagers, and helped secure critical resources like food and boats for river crossings such as the Chindwin and Irrawaddy. He concludes by thanking the correspondent and expresses interest in preserving their stories for future generations.